Don't order anything from the rag and bone shop. The call came on a Wednesday night, just after 9. I remember because the clock on my microwave blinked 9:03 in green LED lights when I heard my phone buzzing on the counter. I was halfway through reheating leftover pizza, a rare indulgence ever since I'd sworn off takeout in the name of self-improvement. Seeing her name on the screen sent something awful through me. I hadn't heard from Sophie in 3 days, not since our fight about, well, everything. Work, money, free time, faith. I didn't blame her for being tired of me. Most days I was tired of me too. I hesitated before answering. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. I tried acting as if I wasn't dreading that call. There was a pause. Not a good one. The kind where you know the person on the other end is carefully choosing their next words. "Leah." "Hi, Michael," she finally said. Her voice sounded small, tired. "Can we talk?" My throat tightened. "Yeah, sure." "What's up?" Another pause. Then she let out a single long exhale. "I can't do this anymore." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What do you mean?" "Sophie, come on. We can—" "Please don't," she interrupted. Her voice was cracking. "I've been trying to make this work for months, but it's always something, Michael. Every time I think we're okay, you slip." "I haven't had a drink in 137 days, I shot back, defensive. "I'm doing everything I can." "And that's great," she cut in again, her tone soft but firm. "But it's not just the drinking. It's the way you close yourself off, the way you push me away every time I try to help." "And trying," I said, my voice losing itself. "I love you," she said. "I love you too," she said. And that was the worst part, because I could hear the finality in her voice, the resignation. "But I'm not the one who can save you. You need a foundation that's stronger than I can be." I wanted to argue, to beg her to reconsider. Instead, I just stood there, gripping the phone like it was the only thing keeping me standing. "I hope you find peace, Michael," she said after a long silence. "I really do. I'll be praying for you to get the help you need." Then the line went dead. I don't remember hanging up. I don't remember the pizza burning in the microwave or the phone slipping out of my hand. What I do remember is standing in front of the cabinet above the fridge, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I stared at the unopened bottle of Jack Daniels I'd kept hidden just in case I really needed it. My sponsor would have had a field day if he had seen me. "A safety net is just a noose with extra steps," he'd say. But I'd always been too afraid to get rid of it, just like I'd been too afraid to open it. Until now. My hand trembled as I reached for the bottle. The glass felt cool against my palm, almost soothing. I turned it over, the amber liquid sloshing inside. For a second, I thought about Sophie's voice, the way it cracked when she said goodbye. I thought about the 137 days I'd fought to claw my way out of the hole I'd spent years digging myself into. Though, of every prayer my AA group forced me to say about every time Sophie had dragged me to church. I hated it all. I hated that I wasn't fixed. I hated that I didn't feel saved. I hated that. And then something shifted. 1 second I was in my kitchen, staring down the edge of a decision I wasn't ready to make. The next, I was sitting in a plush leather chair, the smell of cigar smoke and bourbon heavy in the air. The bottle was gone, the kitchen was gone. All around me was the hum of jazz and the low murmur of voices. I blinked, disoriented, and looked up. A man in a crisp black vest stood behind the bar, polishing a glass with slow, deliberate movements. He smiled when he saw me. "Rough night, Michael?" he asked, his voice smooth as silk. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. How the hell did he know my name? The man behind the bar tilted his head slightly, his smile widening just enough to put me on edge. "Michael," he repeated, like it was the punchline to some private joke. "Welcome back to the rag and bone shop." I looked around, trying to get my bearings. The walls were dark wood, polished to a near-mirror finish, and the room was dimly lit by a series of perfectly aligned lamps that casted long, flickering shadows. A faint jazz tune played from a record player in the corner, the needle crackling as it turned. The other patrons were scattered throughout the bar, sipping drinks or murmuring to each other in tones too low for me to make out. None of them looked at me. My voice faltered. I cleared my throat, trying again. I didn't mean to come here. The bartender chuckled softly. Most people don't, he said, setting down the glass he'd been polishing. His hands were immaculate, not a speck of dirt or a crack in his manicured nails. But here you are. I was at home, I said, the words spilling out in a rush. In my kitchen. I had a bottle in your hand, he interrupted smoothly. Jack Daniels, if I'm not mistaken. An old friend of yours, isn't he? My stomach churned. How do you know that? He leaned forward, planting his elbows on the bar and resting his chin on his interlocked fingers. His eyes, dark and sharp, met mine, and for a moment, I couldn't look away. Let's just say I know a man at a crossroads when I see one. I forced myself to break eye contact, glancing at the drink menu lying on the bar. There were no prices listed. My throat was dry and I found myself licking my lips. I don't want a drink, I said firmly, pushing the menu away. Of course you don't, the bartender said, his tone friendly but condescending, like he was humoring a child. You're just here to, what, soak up the ambience? I stood up, the stool scraping against the floor. I'm leaving. Barry? The bartender didn't move, but his smile widened. You're free to try, he said, but you might find the door harder to reach than you think. He put the glass back on the table. I turned toward the entrance, my heart pounding. The door wasn't far, just a few steps, but as I started walking, the distance seemed to stretch. Each step I took felt slower, heavier, like wading through thick honey. Then Well, are you in such a rush? The bartender called after me. Sit down, Michael, have a drink. Take the edge off. God knows you've earned it. He didn't stop, didn't look back. The door was right there. Just a few more steps. Then I heard the sound of glass clinking against wood, and my feet froze. Do you remember the first time you drank? The bartender asked. I bet you do. Everyone remembers their first, that warm rush in your chest, the way the world seemed to tilt in your favor for once. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see him out of the corner of my eye. He was leaning casually against the bar, holding a tumbler of amber liquid. The ice cubes clinked softly as he swirled the glass. Do you remember the way it felt, Michael, to let go of everything for just a little while? Shut up, I said, my voice shaking. He ignored me, taking a slow sip from the glass and savoring it like it was the finest thing he'd ever tasted. That's the thing about alcohol, isn't it? It's a liar, a cheat. But God, does it know how to make you feel alive? I turned fully to face him, my anger outweighing my fear for the first time. I said, I'm not drinking. I don't want anything from you. The bartender smirked, setting the glass down with a deliberate clink. We'll see, he said. For the first time, I noticed the other patrons watching me. Their faces were pale and expressionless, their eyes glassy. The bartender snapped his fingers to get my attention, then gestured toward an empty stool. Sit down, Michael. Let's talk. No pressure, no obligations. Just you, me, and a little perspective. I felt my legs move on their own. I returned to a seat in front of him. He raised an eyebrow, his expression amused. There we go, he said. He reached beneath the bar and produced a small, familiar object. A silver flask engraved with my initials. My chest tightened. I hadn't seen that flask in years, not since I'd thrown it into the river after my first stint in rehab. Now, it has a way of finding its way back to you, the bartender said, his smile sharp as a knife. Funny how that works, isn't it? As I stared at the flask, my mind racing. The door behind us opened, letting in a blast of cold air. Who's the handsome man? A soft feminine voice asked. I turned to see her. She was beautiful. She stepped into the bar like she'd been there all along, the kind of beauty that stretched beyond her looks, but into the way she carried herself. Her dress shimmered faintly in the low light, hugging her figure. Dark hair spilled over her shoulders, and her red lips curled into a smile that could stop a heart mid-eat. She already held a martini glass in one hand, the liquid inside catching the light like liquid gold. Her eyes locked on mine, and for a moment it felt like the room had gone completely silent. "You must be Michael," she said, her voice smooth and inviting. "How do you know my name?" I asked softly. She laughed, the sound like wind chimes caught in a summer breeze. "Everyone knows your name here. You're the guest of honor," she added. The bartender chuckled behind me, the sound low and amused. "Let me introduce you to Lydia. She's a connoisseur of sorts." The woman Lydia moved closer, her heels clicking softly against the floor. "You look like you could use a drink," she said, holding out the martini glass to me. "It's just one. No one's counting here." I shook my head. "I don't want a drink." "You down world," she repeated, her tone light, almost teasing. "Or, don't trust yourself to take just one." Her words hit like a slap. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. She smiled, sensing my hesitation, and took a seat next to mine. "Michael," she said softly, her voice dropping to a breath. "You're hurting. I can see it in your eyes. The guilt, the pain, the weight of it all. Don't you want to let it go? Just for a little while?" Her words dripped with sympathy, but there was something behind them, something cold and calculating. "I'm fine," I said, though the pain in my voice betrayed me. "You don't look fine," Lydia replied. She held the martini glass closer, the golden liquid rippling slightly. "This will help, just one sip." "You deserve that much, don't you?" My pulse was pounding in my ears, and the room felt like it was closing in. "Listen to her, Michael," the bartender said, his voice like velvet. "She's offering you a way out, a little relief from all that pain you carry around. Let's be honest here, you're not a saint after all. At the very least, this helps preserve your happiness, but you might find it more than you think." My eyes lingered on the drink in Lydia's hand. Lydia tilted her head, studying me with those impossibly sharp eyes. "You're not doing this for her, are you? That girl who just left you? What was her name? Sophie?" The mention of her name hit me hard. "Leave her out of this." "Why?" Lydia asked, her voice dripping with faux innocence. "You think she's suffering the way you are?" "No, Michael, she's fine. She's probably asleep right now, dreaming of a life without you in it." "Shut up," I snapped. My voice barely sounded like my own. She didn't flinch. "I'm just being honest. You've been trying to fix yourself for her, haven't you? But now she's gone, and you're still here, still broken." Her words burrowed into my chest like shards of glass. I looked away, staring at the floor, but the sound of the martini glass being set down on the bar made my head snap back up. Lydia's smile widened. "You don't have to be broken, Michael," she said. "Not tonight, not with us." I could feel the bartender watching me, his presence oppressive and inescapable. My eyes flicked to the drink on the table, then back to Lydia. "Shouldn't," I muttered, though it felt like the word was being ripped out of me. Her expression softened, her voice turning gentle. "It's okay to be weak, you know," she said. She leaned in even closer, so close I could smell her perfume, something sweet but cloying like honeyed flowers. My resolution felt like it was physically wavering in my heart. I could see my reflection in her eyes, distorted and empty. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," Lydia whispered. I closed my eyes, forcing the image of her out of my head. Sophie's voice echoed in my mind, faint but clear. "I hope you find peace, Michael." Somehow, I found the strength to stand up and take a step toward the door. "Eh?" Then another. "I'm leaving," I said, louder this time. Lydia's smile faltered for the first time. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice cold and sharp. I didn't respond. The bar didn't expand this time. I reached the exit. My hand reached for the doorknob, my heart pounding. My fingers brushed the cold metal, and for a moment I thought I'd made it. Just one turn, one pull, and I'd be free of this place. But before I could twist it, the bartender's voice stopped me cold. "Exertion. You really think you're leaving?" It wasn't the words that froze me. It was the tone. Gone was the silkiness, the easy charm. His voice was vicious now, colder, with an edge that scraped against my nerves. I didn't turn around. "Yes," I replied, though I found my feet rooted to the floor. "Of course you are," he said, almost laughing. "But before you go, maybe you'd like to see what you're returning to." Something clinked behind me. Against my better judgment, I glanced over my shoulder. The bartender still stood behind the bar, but his posture had shifted. He wasn't relaxed anymore. His hands were braced on the counter, his grin stretched just a fraction too wide, teeth unnaturally white against the dim light. He gestured toward the corner of the room, where an old television sat on a metal cart. I hadn't noticed it before. The screen flickered to life, casting a cold bluish glow over the bar. Static buzzed and cracked, but after a moment, the image sharpened. At first I didn't understand what I was looking at. It was a room, messy, familiar. The lighting was dim and broken furniture littered the floor. A man sat slouched on a couch, his head tilted back, a bottle of whiskey dangling from his fingers. It took me a second to realize it was me. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, my voice betraying me. The bartender didn't answer, his grin widening as the scene on the TV shifted. The me on the screen leaned forward, taking a long swig from the bottle. His movements were sluggish, almost puppet-like. He muttered something unintelligible, then staggered to his feet, knocking over a lamp. "Stop it," I said, louder this time. The bartender tilted his head. "Stop what? This is just reality, Michael, the life you're so desperate to return to." The TV flickered again, showing me stumbling down a dimly lit street. My clothes were disheveled, my face pale and gaunt. I shouted something at a group of strangers, my words slurred and incoherent. They walked away quickly, not even sparing me a second glance. "That's not me," I said, but the words felt hollow even as I said them. Lorraine tilted her head, startled. "Oh, but it is," the bartender said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "This is where you are, Michael, right now. This is what you're doing." The scene shifted again. This time, I was in a dingy bar, surrounded by people who looked just as lost as I did. A woman leaned close to me, her lipstick smudged, her eyes glassy. I laughed at something she said, then downed another shot. The sound of ice clinking against glass pulled my attention back to the bartender. He held up a drink, the amber liquid catching the light. "This is what you want, isn't it? The warmth, the numbness, the escape." I turned back to the TV, my stomach twisting. The images felt too vivid, too real. I could almost feel the burn of the whiskey, the weight of the emptiness that followed. The bartender's voice softened again, almost kind. "Do you see it now, Michael? The futility of fighting it? You're already there. You've already made the choice. This place?" He gestured to the bar around us. "It's just a courtesy. A little limbo to ease the transition." "No," I said, my voice barely audible. "I'm not doing that. I'm not drinking." The bartender chuckled, setting the glass down with a deliberate clink. "Oh, Michael, you're holding the bottle right now. Do you think you're still standing in your kitchen, staring at it, debating? No. You've already opened it. You've already taken that first drink." I shook my head, stepping back toward the door. My heart was pounding, my chest tight. "You're lying." "Am I?" he asked, his tone almost playful. "Or are you lying to yourself?" The TV crackled again, the screen filling with static before cutting to another scene. This time it was Sophie. She was sitting in a brightly lit cafe, her phone in her hand. Her face was tense, her lips pressed into a thin line. She was talking to someone, a friend maybe someone more. The bartender's grin faded slightly, his tone turning serious. She's already moving on, Michael. You can't undo what you've done. You can't fix it. But you can stop running from the truth. Huh. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. What do you want from me? The bartender's smile returned. I want you to accept who you are. Stop pretending you're something you're not. Sit down, have a drink, and let it all go. My back pressed against the door, the weight of his words, the images on the screen, the sound of Lydia's quiet laughter. It all pressed down on me like a crushing wave. You're fighting so hard, the bartender said, his tone calm, almost soothing. But for what? What's waiting for you out there, Michael? More of the same? You think you're strong enough to face it, but we both know you're not. I shook my head, swallowing the lump in my throat. You don't know me. He smirked, tilting his head slightly. Don't I? I've been with you every step of the way. Every time you reached for a drink, every time you told yourself it was the last one, I was there when you made those promises, and I was there when you broke them. I'm not that person anymore. The bartender chuckled, low and deep, as if I'd said something amusing. You keep telling yourself that, but you don't believe it, do you? He gestured to the TV, where the version of me on the screen stumbled out of the bar, laughing loudly with the woman from before. This is who you are, Michael. This is where you belong. Stop it! I shouted, the words echoing through the room. The other patrons turned to look at me again, their faces pale and blank. No life, no soul, just empty vessels. They stared for a moment, then slowly turned back to their drinks. You can yell all you want, Lydia said, her voice soft and sweet. It doesn't change anything. He's right. You've already made your choice. I turned to face her. She was leaning casually against the bar, a new drink in her hand, her eyes glittering with malice. Scooter, Monday's lucky drink? I haven't made any choice, I said through gritted teeth. Haven't you? She asked, arching an eyebrow. Then why are you here? Why did you come to us? It didn't, I started, but she cut me off. Of course you did, she said, taking a slow sip of her drink. You were standing in your kitchen with that bottle in your hand and you called out. You wanted someone to tell you it was okay, that it wasn't your fault. And here we are. I shook my head, backing further into the door. No, I didn't want this. The bartender leaned against the counter, his grin widening. Denial is a funny thing, isn't it? You've spent your whole life running from the truth, Michael, from the things you've done, the people you've hurt. But deep down, you know there's no escaping it. There's no forgiveness for you. His words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. My mind flashed with images. Sophie's tear-streaked face, my mother's disappointment when I missed yet another family dinner, the countless nights I'd spent drowning in a bottle instead of facing my problems. I felt the guilt clawing at my chest, threatening to pull me under. Stop, I whispered, barely audible. What was that? The bartender asked, cupping his ear in mock confusion. Did you say something? I said stop, I shouted. He laughed, a sound that seemed to echo from everywhere at once. You can't stop this, Michael. This is you. This is all you've ever been, and all you'll ever be. My legs gave out and I slid down the door, my hands trembling as I gripped my head. The images on the TV blurred together, a sickening montage of my worst moments. I could hear Lydia's voice in my ear, soft and taunting. You can't fight it, she said. Why would you even want to? The world out there doesn't care about you. No one's waiting for you. No one's coming to save you. But here, we can make it all go away. I looked up at her, my vision blurry with tears. Why are you doing this? She crouched down in front of me, her smile as sharp as a blade. Because it's what you want, Michael. Deep down, you know it is. The bartender stepped closer, holding out the tumbler of whiskey. One drink, he said, his voice low and persuasive. That's all it takes. One drink, and all this pain goes away. He stared at the glass, the amber liquid swirling like a storm. My hands itched to reach for it, to take it and make everything stop. But then Sophie's voice echoed in my mind again. "I hope you find peace, Michael." "Ah." "Michael," the bartender said softly, holding the tumbler closer, the amber liquid catching the dim, flickering light. "This isn't defeat. This isn't failure. It's mercy. You've carried enough. Why not let it go?" His words slithered into my mind, each one heavier than the last. My gaze flicked to the glass, then back to his face. His grin was still there, but now it was sharper, less human. Lydia's voice floated in behind him, quiet and piercing. "Listen to him," she cooed. "What do you have to lose? It's just one drink. It's not like anyone will notice." My fists tightened against my knees. My chest felt like it was caving in, my breath coming shallow and fast. The TV behind them still showed scenes from my life. The drunk me, the careless me, the cruel me. Women's voices suddenly ring, and I feel this sickening presence, like a cold spell pressing down. "What was that?" the bartender asked, leaning closer. "I don't want this," I repeated, louder this time. My voice cracked, but I didn't care. I looked up at him, the glass shaking in his hand now. "You want me weak. You want me broken. That's all you've ever wanted." His grin faltered, just for a second. It was small, barely noticeable, but I saw it. Lydia straightened from where she was leaning, her smile fading as her eyes narrowed. "Be careful, Michael," she said. "You're treading dangerous ground." I pushed myself up from the door, my legs shaking but holding me steady. "You don't want to help me," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. "You want me to give up. You want me to believe this is all I am." The bartender's grin returned, but it was tighter now, less confident. "And what else are you, Michael?" Look at yourself." He gestured to the TV, where my drunken double stumbled and slurred. "You think you're better than this? You think you're strong enough to fight it?" I took a step forward, my fists still clenched. "I know I'm not strong enough," I admitted, my voice raw. "But I know one other thing. I've still got faith. Even if that's the last gift Sophie ever gives me, I'm not who I was before I met her." Lydia's smile twisted into a snarl, her perfect features warping into something cruel and inhuman. "You think you can run from this? From us?" The bartender slammed the glass onto the counter, his grin finally cracking into something darker, his teeth impossibly sharp. "Bidihu, we're not some dream you can just wake up from, Michael. We're you. We're in you." My heart pounded in my chest as I reached for the doorknob again, my hand shaking. Lydia and the bartender moved closer, their once human appearances flickering, distorting like a bad signal. The air grew colder, the room darker, as their voices layered over each other, a cacophony of accusations and temptations. "Ah, you're nothing without us. You'll fail just like before. No one's waiting for you out there. You belong to us." I shut my eyes, gripping the doorknob so tightly my knuckles ached. Sophie's voice echoed in my mind again, faint but steady. "I hope you find peace, Michael." Caspar cut at the power in the room's hand softly. With a deep breath, I turned the knob and yanked the door open. The cold night air hit me like a slap, sharp and bracing. Behind me the noise surged, their voices rising to a deafening crescendo. I fell backwards. "Don't you leave us!" Lydia screamed, her voice warped and guttural. "You'll come back!" the bartender roared. The sound of their shouts and laughter followed me, growing fainter with each second I dropped. And then suddenly it was gone. The night was silent except for my ragged breathing. I was standing in the middle of my kitchen, the door to the bar nowhere in sight. The bottle of whiskey was still in my hand, its cap still screwed tight. For a moment, I just stood there. My reflection in the glass was distorted, my face pale and drawn. My thumb brushed the label, and for the first time, I didn't feel the pull. I set the bottle down on the counter and turned away, my legs weak but steady. The cold air still lingered on my skin, a faint reminder of where I'd been and what I'd faced. Almost every night I can still hear the sounds of that bar in my head. I can still hear the bartender coaching me forward. But I know I'm not the only one saying no. I'm not the only one putting up a fight. The devil's going to call us all to his rag and bone shop, but just keep saying no. Whatever you order from that bar is going to follow you to the grave.